Do you mind me asking, just when you were talking about that time when you felt like you didn't have hope, are you comfortable talking about what that experience was like and then sort of what steps you took to bring yourself out of that?
Yeah, I don't mind talking about anything. Yeah, I can think of several times. I think the first instance for me, I can't remember how old I was, but I'm going to say 12-ish. And I was in Alaska sitting on a cliff, and we have big tides in Alaska, and I was deeply depressed. And in Alaska, the tides are huge. They go out like a mile. Takes a long time. And then it turns around and it starts to come back in. And I sat there for a good 12 hours, maybe. Nothing's worse than the feeling of utter sheer hopelessness, that there's not a single thing you could do to affect anything ever getting better, right? That's a very unsustainable thing to have. And for some reason, watching the tide go out made me realize, even though it was very slow, the tide came back in. Sounds very simple and very dumb, but I had a eureka moment that physics is physics. Everything changes. Everything in the entire cosmos, seen and unseen, the constant is change. And so the absurd arrogance that I could sit there and think I was the only thing in all the physics that wouldn't change, that my emotion would be permanent, was actually absurd. What an absurd thought, because it was anti-nature. And luckily I grew up in nature. And so it was a real incongruous thing. I was like, I'm having a thought that's actually anti-nature. And that gave me a lot of hope, because I realized everything changes if you give it enough time. That's the caveat. Am I willing to give it enough time? And so I call it buckling myself in. I realized sometimes the tide is just out. And I say that to myself to this day. Sometimes the tide is just out. But physics guarantees it's going to come back in. I use this with my son a lot. He's 11, big feelings, lots of things starting to shift in his life. And I don't always know how it's going to get better. And it is intense what he's going through. And I go, this is intense. You're dealing with something really intense. I don't know how it's going to change, but I do know it is. And so while one part of you can be engaged in just the intensity of it, you can start to afford another part of you getting a little bit curious about, I wonder how this will change. I wonder what the mechanism will be. Maybe I can participate. And so that's one instance, for instance. And something we teach in our youth foundation is just this idea, you studied psychology in, 2-year-olds, there's this phenomenon, psychological development, called object impermanence. It's why peekaboo works. Cover your hand and the baby is like, oh, they disappeared. It's their brain is not developed to the point where they can comprehend this. Well, I don't think we're taught emotional impermanence, if that's a good correlation. And so what I learned that day with the tide is it's not permanent. Yeah, if you were to feel this way forever, I get it. I get why you'd want to check out. That's an intolerable situation. But because of physics, we know that's impossible. You have to buckle yourself in, and you get to go learn a new tool. And you actually can start to help shift this and direct this. And that begins to feel like a much more promising thing, especially if you have somebody that you've locked arms with, that is your partner, and going, let's figure it out. Yeah, this doesn't work. We're going to make sure it works.